Okay, in this video, I use PowerQuery to start loading up these data files that we discussed in the previous slide. We've got several different data sets. I need to bring them all in because I'm going to make queries and answer business questions about these, and we need to bring them in and ultimately tie them together, relate them. When you load a file using PowerQuery, you can either drop the data into the physical spreadsheet, which is what we're normally used to doing. We bring data into a spreadsheet to do analysis. Well, we're not going to do that. You can, and in fact, initially I'll do that to show you how that works, but that's not going to be the best way to do things. For us to use the Power Tools, you need to load the data into the data model. You could load it in both, but and maybe that's what you will do sometimes for comfort, but in reality, you never ever need to load your data into the physical Excel worksheets. So anyway, let me go through and do some of this. So I've got a file and I'm going to name this, I'm going to save as, and put it in my course folder and call this the Food Mart Analytics file, Food Mart. So I've got this file, this is one we'll be working through, and now I'm going to go under Data, Get and Transform, from a file, from a CSV. Now where you put this data is when you first downloaded it from a Blackboard, this is where it is. And I'm just going to bring up the customer one first. Actually the store lookup, it's the smaller one. I'll bring up the store lookup. So look what happens when I do this. It starts bringing in the data, and one thing it does is it promotes the headers, or the first row, as headers. It is giving you the information on what it looks like. And down here at the bottom, this is the key, down here at the bottom, you can either do load or load to, but what I want you to do is get in the habit of always doing edit. This allows us within PowerQuery to do a little bit of manipulation if we need to. So it's almost always better not to do this first, but to go to this edit, and when you do the edit, it opens up the PowerQuery interface. And we're going to have other videos that go over these options, because look at what you can do. You can do where you can essentially tighten up the data by removing columns, removing rows. You can do some transformation of the data. You can actually add additional columns with the merge of other data sets, or you can take similar data sets and stack on top of each other. Sometimes you want to transform the data, sometimes you want to add additional data. And there's a lot, so we're going to spend some time going over some of these. One particular really cool one is this ability to unpivot. Sometimes you're given data that's essentially already been pivoted and it doesn't really do us much value. And can we take a data set and unpivot it and turn it into more of a record-based data set, which is what we usually want to work with. So we'll have a video that goes over this. And notice when I open this up over here to the right, this is a script that's getting written. I didn't do anything over here, but I can look at this and it's doing a script. The other thing is that over every column or every field, it guesses on what type of data is. So this means it's a whole number, but you can see all the different formats that it could be. So number, whole number, this is text, 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 which is what we want. Text. Now this one right here, this is also text. Notice that these became dates. These are dates, and that's correct. Total square foot, which is a whole number, and grocery square foot. So I like all this. I like all this. I like everything that it's done so far. I'm going to leave it as is, and what I'm going to do now is, again, if you do all this editing, you'll say, we'll do some, you'll see this script getting bigger. For example, maybe region ID, I don't want this to be a number, but actually it's an identifier. I could turn this into text. I could go here and turn this into text. Look what happens. It's going to ask, is an existing type, replace current? So now that's true. And so when it changed type, that right there, that actually modified the code and turned that into text. Not that you need to know that. So this is the Power Query editor that allows us to transform data before we load it. Once you've done this, oh, and also this is the name of the query that you've written, store lookup, and I'm going to leave it just like that. You can change the name of it to whatever you want. But once you've done all this, now we're going to do a close and load to. Don't do close and load initially. Do close and load to. Now this is where it asks. It's saying, where do you want the data to reside? All right, I'm going to put it in the table. But later on, a much better way to do this is to add to the data model and probably just create a connection. Usually you don't need to actually physically drop the data into this spreadsheet. Really, you just need a connection, but you want to add it to the data model. For now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way, kind of what we're used to doing. And it's going to create a new worksheet. And just like that, this query was written. This query was written. And there's the data. It drops in the data in sheet 2. And that's where it resides. And you're done. And so you could go do another one and keep doing that. Well, if we did this, essentially what we're doing, if we would do this for all of our data sets that we plan on bringing in and making decisions against, we would have multiple worksheets of different data and a really large, or a worksheet with multiple worksheets and different data sets. So we don't really need to do this very often. But so I'm going to go back and actually take this. So this query shows up here when I hover over it. And you can get to this query under data, get data, and go look at any of the queries that you've done. But over on the right, I'm going to go actually just delete this. You could edit it here, but I'm going to just delete it. And it says you want to delete this, and I say yes. So this exists, but I'm going to get rid of this worksheet also. We're back to where we started. Now I'm going to do it again, but this time rather than loading it into Excel, I'm going to load it into this data model. Now we haven't really talked about what a data model is. We'll use this in the 3rd and 4th week a lot. We have already loaded PowerPivot, so we've got this, but I'm going to go back to data, get data from a file, from a text file, grab the customer lookup, import, edit, do whatever manipulation that we want to do to this, anything that we want to do. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to leave it as is. Oh, this is the customer one. I did the customer one this time. And I'm going to go under, well, I'm going to look at this. So the account number, I'll leave that as actually I'm going to turn this into, let's turn this account number into a whole number. So I'm left clicking, whole number. It might be better to make that text. I'm going to leave that. So now it's a whole number. First name, text, 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 text. I'll keep going over. Text. The zip code clearly needs to be an identifier. It's not really a number. It's an identifier. It's a code. So I'm going to left click and turn this into text. Text, dates, yes, text. This is text. It gives me a range of income. Total children is a number, text, more dates, whole number, And I think that's the only thing I'm going to change, those two. Now I'm going to do close and load to. And now I'm going to go add this to the data model, and I'm just going to create a connection. So look what happens. It's going and building my query again. And you're going to say, all right, well, what happened? Well, nothing is in our file now. Our worksheet doesn't exist, but we have loaded these customers in this case. If you want to go see what you've done, you can go under PowerPivot, go under Manage, and this brings up the PowerPivot form, which doesn't look exactly like Excel, even though it resides in Excel. And now you've got a worksheet called Customer Lookup. For you database Microsoft Access people, if you go to the diagram view, there's your table that you loaded with all of the fields. Go back to the data view, you'll see some of the data and you'll see the worksheets. All right, I'm going to close that out. Now I'm going to load in the rest of these files. I'm going to do it again, data, get data from a file, from a text file. I've just ordered the customer. We'll have a separate file for transactions. We'll do a separate one. So I'm going to do product. Actually, I'll go ahead and do transactions 1997, import it. Always do an edit, bring up the Power Query editor, make sure it gives you this is a date, this is a date, product ID, it's treating it as a whole number. I'll leave it like that. Customer ID, it's a whole number. Store ID. So these are all fine. I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to do a close and load to. I'm going to only create a connection and load it to the data model. So again, within this file, there is actually nothing in this file, but we have this data model that we've loaded two different queries. So we got two data sets. Let's go do some more. Get data from a file, from this. I'm going to go ahead and get the product lookup, edit. Let's look at what we have. The ID I'm cool with, text. Product SKU, I'm going to make that a whole number. It's an identifier. I'm not going to make it a real number. I'm going to make it a whole number. So I'm going to do this. When this thing pops up, this piece of code that it already ran for us, it is the one that identified what type of format the data is. If I want to replace the current, it'll modify this statement. I can actually add a new step. So look what happens when I add a new step. This one, its sole purpose is to change the type of this to a whole number type. But I can go back to it, and then I deleted it, and I can just go edit this and make it, and I'll just say replace. So now this command change type, which is looking at all of the columns, it just edited that. Retail price, I could turn this into a dollar amount, because it is. So I could go to currency. Same thing on this one, product cost. I can turn that into currency. Product weight, recyclable. This has got some null variables. That means there's nothing there. That's fine. We'll leave it as is. We'll just leave everything with null. Means that there's not there. It's either recyclable or there's a null value or there's nothing there. We'll talk about this more later on. All right, I've now got all my products. I'm going to do a close and load to. I'm going to create a connection, add to the data model, like that. Do another one. Customer, food, transactions, product. Let's do some more. Get data from a file, CSV file. Let's do a region and a store. I'm going to save another video for the calendar. Do a region. Actually, let's just do store. Edit. I'll leave everything as is, do a close and load to, create a connection, add to the data model, like that. And just for grands, I'll go ahead and do the calendar one too. The calendar one is fairly basic. I'm going to edit it. It's got dates of all the transactions starting in January, all 97 all the way to the end of this is, if you would go to the end of this, the last day of this. I'm going to give you a separate video on how you can build your own calendar. Sometimes you need a calendar that has every date listed in that time period. If you just rely on when transactions occur, sometimes you might have a transaction on the 10th, but you might not have another transaction until the 12th. So if you try to build a calendar table from a transaction data set, you won't get everything, but I'm going to show a separate video to show how you can always create a calendar table fairly quickly. Okay, close and load to, create a connection, add this to the data model. So now, again, there's nothing in there, but if I go under the Power Pivot and go look at my data model, so remember how I got there. There's a couple of ways to do that. Under the Power Pivot, you can do that, or you could go under the Data tab and go over here to the Manage Data Model. Either way will get you there. Notice I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabs that have all of this information in there. Or I could do the diagram view and see these 5 tables. So just to give you an idea, eventually we're going to start linking these together, and essentially what we're doing is building the equivalent of lookup functions, but we're going to use database relationships to do that. Okay, that's enough for this video, and I'll have some more videos that do more how to use Power Queries next.